Welcome. Welcome this morning to Community Church Unitarian Universalists. We gather in person and virtually. In these unaccustomed times, they're red again. Our purpose is to form a community to practice and advance a free and responsible search for truth and meaning as a progressive, open-minded, and inclusive community. We believe we do not have to think alike to love alike. Ours is a faith in action as we do the work of justice and compassion in our quest to live ethically, recognizing the inherent worth and dignity of all people. We welcome those who come in the spirit of love. You are welcomed here. You are loved. Announcements this morning. One I want to recognize is Father's Day. Now, you may not be a father of birthed children. You could father other people. You could be a mentor. You could be a foster parent, an adoptive parent, anyone that helps to guide our youth in a fatherly way. And so we want to salute you this day and recognize the importance that you play in all communities. So we're happy about that. It's also continued Pride Month, and we celebrate that, surely. And then today, it's Juneteenth, which our church member, Sally Jackson, is going to bring us a message today about Juneteenth. And I'm really looking forward to learning more about the celebration. I grew up hearing about it, but not knowing specifically a lot about it. So we're looking forward to that. We also, Lizzie Killeen has an announcement that she'd like to make.
Good morning, everybody. So next Tuesday, not in 2 days, but next Tuesday, June 28th, Together New Orleans is having their citywide assembly of the public launch of the community lighthouses. And we pledged to have 10 members, and we already have 8 signed up, so that's awesome. But we would love it if we could get more, because we're being announced that we're going to be one of the pilot community lighthouses, so that's awesome. But Governor John Bel Edwards, Congressman Troy Carter, Mayor LaToya Cantrell, and Council President Helena Moreno will be there to help launch this program and kind of get it finally going. You know, we've heard a lot about it, but we're finally actually getting going. And it's going to be at 4 p.m. at Household of Faith Church in New Orleans East. And there's sign-up cards I can give you if you're interested in doing that. And we want those 10 members, but if we get more, that'd be awesome. And we want them there on June 28th to be, so we can be fully represented. So you can sign up online, or I can give you the card and I can help you sign up online. The Community Lighthouse, if you don't remember or you've never heard of it, is a solution that we as Together New Orleans are taking the initiative to bring to life. Congregations all across the city, we're starting with, I think, 24, but eventually it'll be 100 different locations, mostly churches, but also some community buildings where they'll have solar panels like we already have with battery backup, which we're going to get. And when the lights go out because of hurricanes or something like that, then there will be power here, and we can have people come charge their phones or their medical devices, or, you know, get some air conditioning relief, because, you know, hurricane season's always in the hottest time of the year. So you can sign up with the card or talk to me after service, or at togethernola.org. But, and if you want, we're gonna meet at 3 o'clock to carpool over there, because there's gonna be a lot of people, so, you know, we can carpool and get a good parking spot. So, yeah, just talk to me after service if you would like to be involved. Thank you.
Thank you, Lizzie. Lizzie's one of our newer members that has contributed so much to this congregation. We really appreciate her and her work with our Justice Committee. What's that? Oh, okay, thank you. Too many things to try to remember. Thank you, Esther. Also, I wanted to announce that on July the 17th, the membership committee, membership ministry is going to offer a new to CCUU class. And it will be after the church service. We usually have pizza and stuff. And we'd appreciate if you would RSVP if you'd like to attend this class. There's no obligation to attend it, in that attending it doesn't mean you have to join or anything like that. It just means you want to know more about our congregation and how it works and how it does its particular brand of Unitarian Universalism. If you've traveled much, you know that each congregation is somewhat different. We all have different personalities, it seems, but we'd love for you to attend. It is a requirement for membership, but you can take it and then wait until you're ready to join or take it right away. So that'll be July the 17th, about 12:30, 12:15. If you'd RSVP to membership at ccuunola.org. As we traditionally begin our service, we light a chalice. Truth and knowledge, the warmth of love and community, and the fire of hope and commitment. Thank you. We're invoking hope and eternal truth in our worship services with that lighting of the chalice. There's Yes, it's right in our order of service, isn't it? Yes, that's right. Maybe it's not there. It usually is there. Cynthia Ramirez, our RE director, has the lesson for all ages this morning.
We're going to be learning a little bit about Juneteenth.
Okay, class, who would like to do problem? You may have heard about the holiday known as Juneteenth, but have you ever wondered how it got started? Let's find out on today's episode of The name Juneteenth is short for June 19th, the day Juneteenth is celebrated each year. Why June 19th? That was the day that U.S. troops arrived in Galveston, Texas, all the way back in This executive order was issued by President Lincoln on January 1st, 1863. It stated that all enslaved people in Confederate states that were rebelling against the United States, quote, shall be then, thenceforward, and forever free. This freed all slaves across the country, on paper at least. In reality, the Emancipation Proclamation didn't free anyone right away. It applied to places under Confederate control, which meant that in practice, the law was only enforced once Union soldiers took control of Confederate territory. The problem was, nothing had changed in a far-flung state like Texas, which stayed on the outskirts of the Civil War. No major battles were fought in the Lone Star State, so there were no Union troops to impose the new law. But that finally changed on June 19, 1865, when Union troops arrived in Galveston, Texas, and read General Orders Number 3, which said, "The people of Texas are informed that, in accordance with a proclamation from the Executive of the United States, all slaves are free." So, Juneteenth marks the true beginning of the end of slavery in the United States. Just a few months later, slavery in America was formally abolished with the 13th Amendment. Also known as Freedom Day, Jubilee Day, Liberation Day, or Emancipation Day, this holiday has been celebrated each year in Texas on June 19th ever since. Over the years, the Juneteenth tradition has spread all around the country, and in 1980, Texas was the first state to make it an official state holiday. By 2006, 14 more states have recognized it, and just 2 years later, almost half of the 50 states observed Juneteenth. By 2019, 47 states and Washington, D.C. have recognized Juneteenth, everywhere but North Dakota, South Dakota, and Hawaii. As of 2021, it's not yet recognized as a national holiday. But with more and more people starting to celebrate the holiday each and every year, it's only a matter of time before that changes for good and Juneteenth is here to stay. You may have heard about the holiday known as Juneteenth.
It is a national holiday, by the way. No, it's a little, I think it was 2022, right? Or was it 2021?
Oh, when it was established.
I think it's, now it's an official.
We're going to celebrate it on Monday.
Yep. All right. Who's on?
Are we going to do a recessional? We don't have any children, Bert. Yes, go ahead, read.
Okay. Okay, we're going to do a little thing out of order here. This is sort of my call to worship because I wanted to make this known. Because you might have noticed a couple of weeks ago for our Pride service, I was the worship associate rather than delivering the message. Reverend Melanie delivered a beautiful message, and I was proud to be her worship associate. I requested this week for delivering my message on the subject of Juneteenth, partially because I grew up in Texas where this celebration actually began. Today we'll look back to the injustices that this date are associated with, the steps we have taken, and how much farther we have to go. If the discussion of slavery and the rather abominable record of human rights violations that our country has been founded on makes you feel a little uncomfortable, that's good. You should feel uncomfortable. Frederick Douglass said, "Those who profess to favor freedom and yet depreciate agitation are men who want crops without plowing the ground." On a more positive note, he also said it is easier to build strong children than to repair broken men. There is the clue as to how we work on this problem, through education. But he had more to say. If there is no struggle, there is no progress. Let us continue to take our part in this struggle and entreat others to join in the cause. Juneteenth is an important celebration of emancipation. It's history and culture by Hannah, one of the authors for the blog site ask.com. The 4th of July may be the most widely known Independence Day in the United States, but it isn't the only important holiday commemorating independence. Juneteenth, which is also called Emancipation Day, takes place on June 19th every year and memorializes the official end of slavery in the United States. While this important tradition has been celebrated since 1866, only in recent years has it begun getting more well-observed attention. Businesses like Twitter, Square, and Electronic Arts made Juneteenth an observed company holiday in 2020, and many offered employees a day off on June 19th, encouraging workers to volunteer in their communities to mark the occasion. On June 17, 2021, President Biden also signed into law a bill that declares Juneteenth an official federal holiday. A decision Bernice King, CEO of the King Center and daughter of civil rights leader Martin Luther King, Jr., called an important moment of reckoning. These efforts to recognize the significance of Juneteenth are commendable and foster a much-needed sense of inclusion. But one of the best ways you can begin to appreciate and honor this holiday is to understand the depth of meaning it holds for Black communities. Get started by learning more about the history and importance of Juneteenth, along with the interesting traditions and celebrations that surround it. On September 22nd, 1862, President Lincoln issued the Emancipation Proclamation. This document declared that as of January 1st, 1863, any enslaved people in the states fighting against the Union in the Civil War were thenceforward and forever free. And the executive government of the United States, including the military and naval authority thereof, would recognize and maintain the freedom of such persons. Although the Emancipation Proclamation was symbolic, important, and changed the focus of the Civil War from maintaining the Union to ending slavery, and although it appeared to express sweeping freedom for enslaved people, it didn't actually free anyone. The Emancipation Proclamation was written to apply to Confederate states that had seceded, but the Union lacked the number of troops it would have required to enforce the executive order in the Confederate States, particularly in faraway areas like Texas. For this reason, and because communications already traveled slowly in the 1860s, the news of the Emancipation Proclamation didn't actually make its way to Texas until June of 1863, 2 months after the Civil War had officially ended. This difficulty with enforcement and slave owners' resistance to give up on the people who were once classified as their property is also a primary reason why slavery persisted even after the Emancipation Proclamation took effect. Major General Gordon Granger, bearing news of General Robert E. Lee's surrender at Appomattox, arrived with Union troops in Galveston, Texas on June 18, 1865. Because they were unaware that the Civil War had ended, Confederate troops were still active in the state. The federal government had ordered General Granger to occupy Texas and enforce the Confederates' surrender. On June 19th, General Granger delivered General Order Number 3, a military order notifying remaining Confederate troops and the people of Texas that all enslaved people were to be freed immediately. Texas was the last of the Confederate states to have the order read, and upon its announcement, former slaves rejoiced. The language in the General Order Number 3 dictated that the relationship between slave owners and formerly enslaved people would become one of employers and hired laborers, and that enslaved people would no longer be considered property. Upon learning of this, many former slaves left right away, some while General Granger was still reading the order, eager to seek the new lives in more welcoming areas of the country. In the wake of this momentous news, many formerly enslaved people immediately began to celebrate with prayer, feasting, song, and dance. The jubilance was palpable. In providing a statement for a history book about Texas, former slave Felix Haywood described the reactions. Hallelujah broke out. Everyone was a-singing. We was all walking on golden clouds. Everybody went wild. We was free. Just like that, we was free. This revelous mood and the resulting celebrations were the basis for Mamunition's Day, which was the original name of Juneteenth.
We weave the fabric of this community as we take this opportunity to share our joys and our sorrows with one another. If you are participating online, you can put something in the chat box and we'll try to catch it and so that we can announce it. Some of you may have picked up cards as you came in the front door. If you would like one and you don't have one, Lizzie has some right there and some pins that she'll share with you. And we'll light a candle with each sentiment. Could you do that for me? And two, for those joys and sorrows that have remained silent within your heart. We certainly appreciate Bert's music that he's sharing with us this morning. Alan writes, happy birthday to Paul McCarthy. He's 80 years old today. From Lizzie, shots for 5 and under. Yes, hallelujah. Her father didn't need back surgery, which is wonderful. Sarah, her brother-in-law, passed away, leaving 2 small children. And presently, 2 brother-in-laws have COVID. That's a lot on a family's plate. Emma writes, she has a joy for her brother Richard, who will be getting married next weekend in Seattle. Lovely. Are there any other? The yellow, this one?
Yeah.
Jim wrote, relief that the January 6th congressional hearings are documenting the serious threats to our democracy. And Jim and Vera, sorrow that our dear friend Susie is in hospice. Very sad. You have one? Lizzie can pick it up. Oh, okay. Thank you. So we like the last 2, one for those sorrows not spoken, and the joys you'll share with us later, I'm sure. And it's time for another reading into your message.
What about the offer claim? No, I haven't done that.
because I skipped it. Sorry, I skipped it, yeah. We're a little disorganized this morning, I apologize. I skipped the offering, we can't do that. Community Church Unitarian Universalist is a self-sustaining congregation. The generosity of members and friends enables the congregation to fulfill its purpose in doing this sacred work of bringing justice, spirituality, and compassion to a community, to our community and beyond. You can make your donations online at ccuuniola.org//stewardship on Facebook page, or on Community Matters, there's a link there. And you can write a check, of course, always to this address, 6690 Fleur de Lis, 70124. The congregation is invited to put their gifts in the offertory bowls as they're passed around.
We'll get it all together by the end of the service, okay? All right. The Emancipation Proclamation, Americans Respond. This is a blog entry by Julie Golia for the Brooklyn Historical Society. A month after President Abraham Lincoln issued the Emancipation Proclamation, famed abolitionist Frederick Douglass reflected on the moral impact of emancipation on all Americans. We are all liberated by this proclamation. Everybody is liberated. The white man is liberated. The black man is liberated. The brave men now fighting the battles of their country against rebels and traitors are now liberated. I congratulate you upon this amazing change, the amazing approximation towards the sacred truth of human liberty. Speaking to a packed house at New York's Cooper Institute, later the Cooper Union, Douglass insisted, as many anti-slavery reformers had long done, that the Emancipation Proclamation was a step forwards towards healing a nation diseased by the evil institution of slavery. Frederick Douglass was born a slave in Maryland in 1818. As he grew, he rebelled against this establishment. He rebelled. Okay, it's early still. In a number of ways, he taught himself how to read and covertly instructed other enslaved people. And he fought back when physically abused. After several unsuccessful attempts, he was able to escape to New York, where he was taken in by abolitionist David Ruggles. After overcoming an initial fear of public speaking, Douglass went on to become one of the anti-slavery movement's most eloquent speakers. A prolific writer, Douglass penned his own autobiography, started a number of abolitionist newspapers, and crafted innumerable other writings. Unlike many other abolitionists of the time, Douglass was also a great supporter of women's rights. In 1863, the Cooper Institute speech, Douglass recounted to his audience of black and white New Yorkers the reaction of the men and women around him upon first hearing of the Emancipation Proclamation. I never saw enthusiasm before, he recalled. I never saw joy before. Men, women, young and old were up, hats and bonnets were in the air, and we have 3 cheers for Abraham Lincoln and 3 cheers for about everybody else. Source was Frederick Douglass, The Proclamation of the Negro Army. Speech at the Cooper Institute, and that was February 6, 1863. Okay. Now, we're going to get right to the historical importance of Juneteenth. And some people have a hard time understanding why Juneteenth is such an important date. As the readings clearly stated, the Emancipation Proclamation was signed long before Juneteenth and only freed the slaves in the Confederate States, not all of the United States. More legislation would be needed, and unfortunately, as we all know, legislation doesn't make it so. It was under Dwight Eisenhower that a constitutional amendment was passed, making it unconstitutional to interfere with anyone's right to vote. And yet we still have gerrymandering and any other number of creative ways to suppress the votes of selected groups. With the readings full of dates and quotes, you're probably afraid that the sermon referring to the historical importance of anything is bound to be full of dates, names, and hundreds of quotes with a possible test to follow. So did you bring your notebooks? Okay. Relax. The importance of a symbolic gesture isn't tied to facts, but to emotions. Rather than focusing in on all of the problems the newly freed slaves had to face, starting with actually gaining their freedom from owners who didn't feel the need to follow the edict, as well as the problems that they had with not being allowed to gather in public places for their celebrations. We're going to look at how the simple act of having a holiday of your own to celebrate can strengthen the bonds within a community. Rather than spending our time looking back at how it was 157 years ago, I'm going to share with you the changes that I have seen within my lifetime. It's a little bit less than half of that. I grew up in a neighboring state, Texas, in Fort Worth, also known as Cowtown. To set the stage, you need to know a bit about the layout of the city. Here in New Orleans area, if you mention a numbered ward like 7th, Upper 9th, Lower 9th, we know what it is and where it is and a bit about its history, just like referring to the Garden District or the French Quarter. In Fort Worth, we had a lot of areas with unusual names. Stop 6, Arlington Heights, Riverside, Ridgely, and Como. And they each had a bit of history. I'll give you the short form. It was during the era, or as I call it, the error of white flight, where homeowners panicked and moved away from their neighborhood if a black family purchased a house in their very white kingdom. It was during that time that Fort Worth's population of white people left the far eastern parts of the city and moved westward. This was also during the time of school segregation, so the neighborhood schools reflected the local population. In misguided attempts to keep the people from the other side of the tracks from going through their neighborhoods, some areas took rather drastic steps. I'm not talking about small gated communities here. I'm talking about major sections of town with large barriers around them. Along the sides of one of the major thoroughfares going north and south, on the west side of the city, it's a very different look. On one side, there were about 15 blocks that intersected with the street. The houses were nice, moderately small, with beautifully kept yards and obviously maintained well by the owners. The other side had a 12-foot high wall with only 3 breaks in those 15 blocks. Those are the only ways to go in and out of that area. It was called the Ridgely Wall. You need to know that Ridgely was a wealthy, mostly new money area of town, white area. And the well-kept houses across the street were in an area known as Como. It surrounded a small lake which was named Como after that beautiful Lake Como in Italy. Why would the rich people in Ridgely want to keep the residents of Como out of their area? The answer should be obvious. It's because the homeowners in Como were black. It was a very nice neighborhood, like most others where everyone has a major investment in their homes, just wanting a clean and safe place to raise their families. That wall was still intact into the 70s. I worked on the western side of the wall and had to drive back past it each night to get back to my house on the eastern side. An important note here, there was no wall on the eastern side of Como. Apparently, most of us weren't as paranoid as the folks in Ridgely. I always worked the night shifts on the weekends, everywhere I ever worked. At this time, I was working in a record store that was open until midnight on weekends. And the last time a shift manager could take a lunch break was about 6 o'clock. We had to finish counting all of the money and prepare the deposits before leaving the store sometime around 12:30. I was always hungry by the time, and relatively few fast food places were open. On my route home, there was a place for fried chicken right at the end of the Ridgely Wall, just before you cross the dividing street. Not only was the chicken great, but they were also open until 2 in the morning. It was rather warm. Well, let's be honest, it was a hot night, with the temperature finally dropping below the triple digits before I got off work, and I decided that some fried chicken would hit the spot. It looked as if I wasn't the only one that had that idea. The drive-thru was spilling out onto the street. The parking lot was packed, and the lobby was completely filled with people ordering chicken and lots of cold drinks. I found a parking space and worked my way into the lobby to place my order. It was at this time that I realized that not only were all of the people in line black, but they had small children with them. It was Juneteenth, and they'd been picnicking around Lake Como all day. They were restocking on food and soft drinks for the next fireworks display. They had one an hour from 10 until around 3 in the morning. Some of the children were trying to fall asleep while standing. Everyone was happy and patiently waiting for their chickens so they could get back to the lake and watch more fireworks. That was when I realized it was so much more than just a date on a calendar or a symbolic gesture to these people. It was what had started them on the path to owning their own homes, living in a world with possibilities, far from perfect, but better than before. It was a reaffirmation of the hope that had for so long been only a dream of freedom. Now they had more goals, working not only to be free, but to achieve equality under the law. I might note that the wonderful owners of that chicken establishment, it wasn't a chain, it was a mom and pop type store. They had given all of their black employees the day off for Juneteenth, and the white women who working behind the counter, who were all about my current age, were more than happy to be frying chicken so that everybody, their friends that worked there, could enjoy the day. That was a beautiful gesture of its own. This is Pride Month, so I'm going to mention that I've had similar feelings when riding in the Pride Parade, but always have to remember that while I have been advocating for equal rights for the LGBTQ plus community, that is just the tip of the iceberg compared to what the black LGBTQ plus people are fighting for on two fronts. Equal rights for both of their communities. So I'm not going to stand here and tell you that the struggle is anywhere near the same, just that the feelings of having your own celebration can be so affirming to marginalized communities. As I have mentioned, Juneteenth dates back 157 years, but we still haven't found a way to get everyone on the same page, because the people on top don't always want the playing field to be level. That's why the whole concept of trickle-down or supply-side economics is so deeply flawed. It's largely our own fault. We teach that competition is the only path to progress, while in reality, cooperation leads to a faster result. So many people mistake rights with privileges that they're certain that giving equal rights to another group of people will diminish their own. Their rights will remain the same. All they have to lose are their privileges that they obtained by taking them away from someone else. Which brings about a discussion as to why school desegregation took so long. It's actually very simple. The people who believed that slavery was a good idea felt that the slaves should never be educated. The thought of their slaves learning to read and write was frightening to them, and it should have been. But slavery had already been abolished for over 100 years before schools were desegregated. How could anyone justify this? Again, it's very simple. You establish separate but equal schools for the black students. It's extremely important for everyone to know that that phrase, separate but equal, means anything but equal. In this case of schools, the disparities were just being hidden. The disparities were in the buildings themselves, as well as the teaching curriculum, supplies, and usually the staffing. I was already in high school before the desegregation began in Fort Worth. It wasn't easy because of the long delay between the emancipation and the desegregation of schools had already allowed the formation of segregated neighborhoods. This made many parents angry, even the ones who favored desegregation, because of the isolation of the different neighborhoods. It ushered in mandatory school busing. No one liked that idea because their children had always gone to neighborhood schools. And now they'd be bused halfway across town. The black parents were more willing to accept this eventuality because it took their children to better schools. Among the parents in the predominantly white schools were the ones that were upset their children were being bused across town to make room for the new students. For some parents, it was bad enough to have black children bust into their schools, but the idea of busing their children into those so-called equal schools that were badly in need of improvement brought them to believe that the black students were being given preferential treatment. Amazingly enough, a simple reversal of roles makes the formerly favored feel persecuted without ever realizing how unfair the previous arrangement had been. There's an old joke answer to the question, why can't life be fair? And that answer is that no one wants life to be fair, just unfair in their favor. Sadly, most humor is based in truth, and that was a perfect example. That feeling that we want life to be unfair in our favor explains why it is so difficult to accept the idea that everyone should have the same rights. People tend to see life as unfair, and someone asking for their equal rights translates to them as wanting legislated superiority. And as we all know, that has been the personal domain of the wealthy white man. A few others have made their way into the club, but the majority of its members are still older white men. It's very difficult to make changes when you don't have enough leverage. The only leverage we have comes from numbers, but we don't seem to understand exactly how that works or how to use it properly. Now, if you imagine the obstacles as large boulders, you need to tackle each one separately. With a coordinated effort, one large lever with lots of people all working together, not on different sides, all working in the same direction, to break down all of the obstacles in the way. You move the first boulder aside, and all too often, this is when the cooperation begins to break down. You've moved the first boulder, and now the people whose problems have been solved by that one being removed are less interested in continuing to struggle. And they decide to not participate anymore. It steadily gets harder. How do we break this cycle? It's part of living ethically, putting the needs of others at least even with, if not ahead of our own. Where did the concept of white supremacy come from, you might ask? You can ask it if you want to. But anyway, you only get partial credit for the answer from white people. It comes from the same source as white fragility, a fear that someone else might be better than you, so you act superior to keep them from finding out about it. You need to remember how many of the people who came to this new world, particularly from England, came into this wilderness to escape oppression. For some, it was religious persecution. For many, it was being the second son of nobility. How is that sons of nobility felt oppressed? Well, only the eldest son inherited the title, the land, and pretty much everything else. So they came to this new world to be the ones that got to do the oppressing. That might seem a bit harsh, but in so many cases it was very much the truth. When you're in charge, it's easy to oppress large numbers of people. You write the laws, and you control their enforcement. It's difficult to cause change, but it can be done, and had been on so many occasions. But so often we stop a bit too early, and things begin to backslide, causing us to fight the same battles again. I say this as someone who was a teenager during the civil rights movement of Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr. And now I'm living through so much of the same battles being fought while I entered my 60s and now my 70s. We have to ask ourselves, why do we keep letting this happen? Because no one likes the fight. So the first opportunity, we claim a victory, we like to go home and congratulate ourselves on a job well done, without realizing it was only a job half done. You're probably wondering what you can do to help. Okay? Let's start with some of the things not to do. Don't go into a situation where you obviously are the outsider and tell the people who've been living in those circumstances what they should do. Instead, ask them if there's anything that you can do to help them. But be prepared to do what they ask you to do, even as to just sit quietly and listen. There's no better way to learn. When you know it's a Black History Month, don't ask when White History Month is, because you already know that it's every month. Don't think that all of the contributions by the Black community only take place in February. That's just Black History Month. When you hear someone shouting Black Lives Matter, don't shout back that all lives matter, because if they all mattered the same, there would be no need for a Black Lives Matter movement. A friend of mine explained to me that he had pushed for the slogan Black Lives Matter too. With the addition of that one three-letter word, we could have avoided that reaction in the first place. During Pride Month, don't ask when straight people Pride is, because it's like White History Month. It's all year long. The easiest way to avoid these situations is to listen, ask questions, and learn more than just these people need help. Learn what they need and find out what you can do, even if it is just finding someone else who has the necessary tools to be of help. Sometimes the best help you can supply is simply showing up. Marches require numbers. If you can walk, show up and march. Sometimes what is needed is an email campaign to bring the issue to the attention of the elected officials at whatever level of government. Numbers matter, and you can be a number for groups that need help. To the original premise, the historical importance of Juneteenth is as a promise. It has yet to be fulfilled. But if we continue to do the work and never give up hope, we might just see true equality before its 200th celebration. Let's concentrate on today. It's going to be really hot, but that never seems to stop a celebration. There will be picnics by the very hardy, family get-togethers at homes and restaurants for many, but be assured that in the fine tradition of celebrations in this area, it will go on all day, no matter how hot it is. It's a celebration of freedom, of the progress that has been made over the past 157 years, and the hope for even more progress with each passing year. And now our benediction. Today, some of us have learned what the Emancipation Proclamation was only a symbolic end to slavery. But what we need to know is that all civil rights amendments and laws are only symbolic until we take them off of the paper and into our hearts, minds, and daily lives. When you leave here today, remember our 7 principles and put them into practice. Living ethically leaves no room for racism or prejudice against anyone. It's not an easy path, but we need to make it our best efforts to follow it because it is our true path. So I would like to say Happy Father's Day, Happy Juneteenth. It may be hot, but go out and celebrate some way, okay?
We'll extinguish the chalice before the postlude. It's number 456 in the back of your hymnal if you'd like to read along. We extinguish this flame. You're not there yet? 4, 5, 6. Join me, please. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again.